has actually been a co-president of HackDavis previously, which is super exciting. So I'm so glad to have her here. And without further ado, Alicia, if you want to take the floor.
Yeah, sure. Dang, you took my whole first slide, which was my introduction, but that's great. So to start off, yes, this will be a tech interview prep workshop. My name's Alicia. Thank you for coming to this. I know project submissions are due in 2 hours, so it's great that you're attending this instead. And in terms of questions during it, if you could put them either in the chat or save them for the end because I will have a Q&A session. And it's hard for me to kind of be interrupted because I can't really see the questions in the middle. So that's the only thing I had. So I'll just get started. Okay, so the agenda for today, see if I can, okay. So I'll start with the basic introduction of myself, go into some tips on how to actually apply before going into how to prepare for a technical interview. Give an example and walk through an actual technical interview, how it would look like. And then I have some miscellaneous topics that we could go over if anyone's interested in any of them, or we can skip straight to the Q&A, which I'm hoping will take up a majority of the time. So starting off with the introduction. So yes, as Larissa mentioned, I am a UC Davis alum. I graduated in June of last year. And I am also a HackDavis alum as co-president last year. And then I ran in total the last 3 events helped organize. So it's really interesting to see it from this side. And the organizers have been doing a great job this year. I'm currently a software engineer at Google. I've been here for 6 months now, specifically working in Google Cloud. And previously, I was at Facebook doing a software engineering internship, and at Microsoft, where I did a software engineering internship my junior year. So I took a quarter off that year. And I also did an Explore internship my sophomore year. And in my freshman year of college, I did research, if that interests anyone too. So in total, I've done over 30 technical interviews at over 15 companies. Okay, getting straight into it. So these are some of my tips on how to apply. Obviously, this presentation isn't going to cover everything, which is why I have a huge Q&A session at the end, but hopefully some of these tips will apply to you. The first tip is just to apply to as many places as possible, which I know is very straightforward and something we all know, but also as early as possible. So I know a lot of people tend to apply kind of a month in, maybe not right when the application opens, but I will tell you it makes a huge difference when you apply. So for instance, for one internship application, I submitted it maybe a month into the application being open. And so I think that's pretty typical that everyone does that. But for another one, I applied the day after it opened. And so in the first case, that process was drawn out for maybe 3 months before I was finally rejected. In the second case, it took me 2 weeks to interview and get an offer. So the thing is, when you apply early, there are fewer people in the application pool. So you have less competition, and the recruiter will reach your application earlier. So it's always good to apply as early as possible. And if necessary, start preparing your resume and everything earlier than you normally would in order to get into this deadline area. So applications usually open mid-August, which is when I would aim to apply. The second tip is to schedule lower priority companies first if you can. What this means is that if you have any companies you're less interested in, if you could schedule those first, you can use those as practice interviews for the ones you're more interested in. So what usually ends up happening is people don't fail interviews because of their technical skills. They usually don't do as well because they haven't warmed up to the environment of an interview. And so doing these mock interviews will really help you be able to be more familiar with the environment once you go into an interview that you actually want the job for. So never reject yourself. I know sometimes there are qualifications on job descriptions that are kind of obscure, maybe 2 or 3 lines that you don't exactly fit, but you should still apply regardless. There's no point in rejecting yourself. You should just let the company reject you if they feel you're not the right fit. These are some resources you can use to find and apply to jobs. I think most of us know them, but I just wanted to put it on the screen just in case. Some of these are specifically for startups. Some of them have startups and companies. So these are just good resources. And finally, I've received questions in the past about whether or not to have cover letters. I have only written a cover letter once, and it was because the company required it. My rule of thumb is if a company does not require a cover letter, don't waste your time writing one. They tend not to help that much. And for instance, Google prohibits cover letters. So tech companies don't really care whether you have them or not, generally speaking. Going on, these are some ways to apply that are unconventional. So besides applying online, it can be much more helpful to connect to an actual person, because in this way, they're actually learning about you and not just looking at a piece of paper. So for instance, you can do this through career fairs. I know right now they're all virtual, but that's still an option. You can see a face, and that really helps. Conferences. So for example, the Grace Hopper Conference. I know some of this won't be completely relevant to COVID times, but hopefully there's enough of it that is to be helpful to you. So the Grace Hopper Conference is the largest women in tech conference in the US. And I attended this conference in my second year. And this was how I got my very first technical interview, just by talking to recruiters face to face. Networking sessions, meaning the company comes to your school, or they host networking sessions where students can come to. Those are fairly frequent. Hackathons like this one are a great way. You've noticed the sponsors, and if you talk with the sponsor long enough, you can then connect to them on LinkedIn. This can lead to a referral and so on. So hackathons are very helpful as well. Campus visits are like networking sessions. Again, just the companies actually come to you. And finally, referrals. So this might not seem like you're connecting to an actual person, but you've connected to someone who can now vouch for you because they've worked with you. So this is, again, another way of showing that you have personally connected to someone at the company. Okay, 1 second, water break. Okay. Let's see, I do have a chat. I will just check it. Okay, very important to check that chat. Okay, preparing for the interview itself. Okay. Here are some resources. So for code practice, you can use resources like LeetCode, HackerRank, CodeShop, CoderByte, etc. I have as a question, LeetCode versus HackerRank, very important. In my opinion, it doesn't matter. Code practice is code practice. I don't think the website should impact that in any way. If you're someone who prefers doing mock interviews, some websites are interviewing.io, InterviewBit, Pramp, etc. I found these from Google search, so I don't vouch for any of them because I'm not someone who likes to do mock interviews. But if you are, these are just some that I found. So I'll be focusing on LeetCode in my next few slides about the process I use to prepare. But you can really just use any website that has a good variety of code problems. This includes both in terms of topic and in terms of skill level. So for freshman, sophomore internships, some basic concepts that you should know. Basically, by basic concepts, by basic concepts, I mean, these are concepts that I've noticed interviewers tend to use in their interviews. And I've really only focused on these concepts that I'm about to share each year for the level internship I'm applying to. And they tend to work out fairly well. I don't think I've ever had an interview outside of the concepts I'm sharing. However, I will not say it's not possible that that can happen. So make sure to study more than what I'm sharing, but these are definitely what I focus the majority of my time on. So for freshman, sophomore internships, I noticed that they emphasize strings, arrays, linked lists, heaps, stacks and queues, hash tables, basic sorting, and binary search. So, oh, by the way, I will share these slides at the end. I will have a URL, so don't try to write all this down right now. There's no need. And these correlate to LeetCode Easy to Basic Medium. And Basically, this is all you've learned in your data structures course in your first year, and that's what they'll test you on. For junior internships, I noticed more emphasis on trees, graphs, recursion, and then DFS and BFS, as well as a very basic dynamic programming. You really just need to know the concept of that. So this, again, huge emphasis on trees and graphs in your junior internships. And finally, for your senior internships, they have very heavy emphasis on trees and graphs, so these will be more difficult problems. They also introduce greedy algorithms. They will actually ask you to apply dynamic programming usually. Oh, I put senior internships. Sorry, this is for full-time jobs. I'll update that at some point. Okay, same thing. So dynamic programming, and then also you should know some about system design, operating systems, so on, and that tends to go into more of the hard problems on LeetCode. And these all assume that you know the concepts from the previous years in depth, that you're familiar with them. And so if they do come up, you can handle them, but it is more important to focus on the concepts that I've listed for that actual level. Yeah, one thing I've done is I sometimes study too hard on the complex algorithms, and then I totally forget how to do string algorithms at that point. So, it happens, but I would put my bet on the harder ones as you get higher level internship / full-time jobs. Okay, going into the actual process. So how do you apply these concepts? What do you do on LeetCode? So on. So the first thing I tend to do is I review the concepts from the previous years. Again, make sure I know those because those will probably come up in your first round, maybe even before your first round when they're screening you. So important to know those. The next thing I do is I review any less familiar concepts from that list that I shared from the year I'm applying to. And I practice problems in full until I'm comfortable with both the concepts and the syntax of the language I chose. So what this means is on LeetCode, I don't look at the solution. I look at the problem. I do the problem in full, meaning I will think of an algorithm myself and I will code it and I will keep coding it until it passes. And I will do this for maybe 3 to 5 problems for each concept until I'm familiar with the concept and then also the syntax. So knowing how to create a hash table in Java, for instance, which is usually my language of choice. Doesn't matter, but that's what I mean. The next step is going through as many practice problems as possible in less depth. So when doing this, I can do about 20 or so more problems, which is probably many more than I could do if I was doing all of these problems in full. So for these problems, I've decided I know the syntax, I know the concepts. I'm just going to keep looking for the tricks now. So I go straight to the solution. Usually I will read the problem. I will kind of think about what algorithm I would use, but I don't code it. I just go straight to the solution, see if there were any tricks that they used to make it faster, like to optimize it, or if there are any algorithm implementations I haven't used before. And I will do this for another 20 or so problems. So I recommend LeetCode Premium when you're targeting specific companies because they have lists of practice problems for many of these companies. For instance, in preparation for my Google onsite, I did use LeetCode Premium and I did over half of the problems in the Google company list. And that was how I practiced. And those problems also tend to be a good variety. So I did pick problems from that list that fit the concepts that I was trying to learn about more. And you can also use LeetCode Discuss for popular coding challenge and interview problems. They tend to actually have really good discussions on the coding challenge problems by company. And they also sometimes share interview problems there. So this is a good way if you don't want to pay for LeetCode Premium to just see what's out there on LeetCode Discuss. Again, any coding practice website will work, but I just focus on LeetCode because that's what I used. Okay, going on. So during the actual technical interview, what should you do now that you've prepared for it? So these are my tips. So the first thing is communication, which I know I'm sure you've heard many, many times, but that's actually the key to an interview is communicating with your interviewer. They cannot help you with your problem unless they know what you are doing. So when practicing, I usually speak to myself. It's weird, but it helps. And that way, when I'm doing the actual interview and like my back is to the interviewer or I'm working on a Google Doc, it sounds the same to me because I'm just with myself again, talking to myself. So just make sure to talk through the process. Hold on, water break, sorry. Okay, you can probably hear my slurping. Oh well. So the first tip that I have, this is kind of more less tips and more like my process, is think about the edge cases and the ballpark big O for the problem. So this means think about what cases might mess up the problem. And then also for the big O, you should really just think about like, if you think of a common test case and you walk through it, this will help you not just determine a big O, but also kind of determine the algorithm that you want. So I kind of do this now, and it might sound backwards, but it does usually impress the interviewer when you can say like, okay, this is the performance I'm aiming for. And in the end, you hit that performance. So that usually helps a lot, for me at least. And I will write these down now. And then the edge cases tend to help me come up with clarifying questions. And this is another kind of trick, is that the interviewer usually wants you to ask clarifying questions. If you don't have any questions for them about the problem, they will see that kind of as a red flag, because you're usually they will usually hide details from you or purposely have you ask them questions about it. So make sure to do that. The second step is to consider your options for data structure and algorithm. This again, I use my common test case that I thought of initially, determine the best fit, as well as the big O, and then the problem itself. This really depends on the problem, so it's very hard to give general tips on that. But I think once you have a test case and a big O, it can be easier to find out what the data structure and algorithm are. Third is to just start with the brute force algorithm. So if you don't know how to optimize right now, and the brute force algorithm is fairly simple and not too hard to implement, do it now. If it will take you longer than at least attempting an optimized solution, do the optimized solution, because that at least shows that you know what algorithm you're going for, even if you can't completely implement it. The fourth step is to then optimize the solution, again, thinking about the big O. And at this point, the interviewer will usually guide you because they can see that you've thought of this brute force, and they can probably tell the differences between the brute force and the optimal. So they can really guide you at this point. And finally, start testing your code before you're being asked, both with those edge cases from the beginning and then any common test cases that you can think of, and then continue to reiterate while these do not pass. So this impresses the interviewer a lot because they will ask you, they're going to ask you to test your code. So if you start doing that before they ask you, that's great. And they'll definitely put marks and notes about that on their review. Okay, gosh, my throat. Okay, so here's an example. Fairly simple example, but I thought it would be good to walk through those steps that I shared. So it says find the first occurrence index of a key in an array, meaning find the first time the key appears in the array and return that index. So the first step is the edge cases and the big O. So I would not be able to tell you really what the big O is right now. We might think O of n, but we don't know yet. So let's first think of some possible edge cases and some common test cases. So, the array could be empty. It could be very large. The key might not be in the array. The key could be somewhere in the array. Specifically, it could be the first element. It could be the last element. Okay, so these are some possible edge cases as well as some common test cases. And now let's see, what might you ask the interviewer, right? So is the array sorted? I think that's the main one that you would ask, because you might think now you're searching, so maybe binary search. But if the array is not sorted, it might be harder to do binary search, right? What should be returned if the key is not in the array? And then does it contain only integers? So these are just some questions that you could be asking. Okay, so let's just give some answers for these. Let's say the array is sorted. Let's go with -1 if the key is not in the array. And then let's say it only contains integers. So we're going to analyze, as I said, this seems like a case of binary search. So let's target O of log n. But if the array was not sorted, how would this change? Well, if you think about it, if the array is not sorted, you then have to sort the array first, right? So instead of log n, sorting that array and then doing binary search would be n log n. But you could also just go through the array, which is O of n worst case. So it would be O of n because you would not want to then have to sort it and do binary search. But we're going with O log n because this array is sorted. Okay, so in this case, we've been given the data structure as an array, and algorithm, we think binary search, but it doesn't seem like it's a straightforward binary search. And it's pretty easy to start with that brute force O of n solution, right? So let's just start with that. And we get this. And the big O, as I said, is O of n for this solution. I'm not really focusing on the code here. You can always go back and review that if that matters to you. But I just wanted to go through the process. This was an O of n brute force solution. Cool. So now we need to optimize that algorithm. And we see that we're targeting a big O of log n, but our current solution is only O of n. And so let's now try binary search. So this is the binary search version. You can see it's much more complicated, which is why you start with the simpler version. And then this one you can be helped with. So it's basically just regular binary search. The only modification is that comment I left in the else of the binary search, which is basically you find an index of the key, and now you search to the left of that index to see if there's an earlier version of it. And you keep doing that until you find the earliest. The earliest was the occurrence of the key. And this big O is O of log n. Okay, and the final step is the testing step. So this is easy for us now because we already thought of possible edge cases and common test cases, and we wrote them down. And they're right here. So you can't really test the array is very large, but you can think about it. And talking to the interviewer and letting them know you're thinking about scalability and what will happen if this array is huge does a lot for you. And it shows that you're really thinking in terms of a programmer. And so you just iterate through these with your solution, talking through each line basically of the solution as you go. And if any of them don't work, proactively go back and fix it, right? Okay, that was a lot of talking. Okay, we are pretty much right on time, which is about halfway through. So at this point, we have reached a crossroads, which is we can either go through some miscellaneous topics, and I will show them here. Let me quickly describe them, and then you guys can decide whether you have any that interest you that you'd like me to go into further detail about, or we can go straight into Q&A, which can be about basically anything. So behavioral questions in interviews, kind of the types of questions you should expect for either the questions or behavioral interviews. Questions for the interviewer, some examples of questions that you can be asking the interviewer. These might not seem very complicated, but actually it can be hard to come up with questions when they ask any questions. Referrals, basically, are they useful? Do you need one? Resume, some tips I have about your resume. LinkedIn and personal website, again, some tips I have on a LinkedIn and your personal website. Projects for your resume. I know sometimes it can be hard to come up with projects to pad your resume. So these are some examples of what you can do for that. And then freshman and sophomore internships is just a small list of internships directed at freshmen and sophomores. So let me read the chat. And then if anyone wants to unmute and say something, feel free to do that too. This is not a recording. And I'm assuming there will be a recording. Okay, projects, resume. Okay. I will do that first. If anyone has any other topics they'd like me to cover, I can do those as well if you share them in the chat. But let me go to the projects for your resume. Okay, so some examples of projects you can put on your resume are personal projects. So if you spend longer on your personal website, then, taking a template, forking it, and then modifying it, I would put that on your resume if you have space. Obviously, any applications you do yourself, as well as extracurricular activities. This could be like from a hackathon like this one. It could also just be, I know there's like UC Davis has, I think, self-drive, what is it? Some car, race car organization and things like that. But there are a lot of personal projects you can do. Larger class projects I've seen, for instance, if you go to UC Davis, there's operating system course. People put like all of those projects on their resume because each of them takes about a month. So larger class projects are good. And then research. So I did research my freshman year, found it very useful, and it gave me a project to put on my resume. Freshman year, I received no responses to any of my applications. I don't even think I got rejected. I was just ghosted by everyone. So the only difference between my freshman year resume and my sophomore year resume was my research project. And research is fairly easy to get into. You really just reach out to professors, and they usually will accept you into their lab and give you a project to do. Okay, let's see. What else do we have? Yes, you can ask questions afterwards. Okay, it looks like those were the only miscellaneous topics. So feel free to unmute or ask questions in the chat, and I can start answering those. Typical way for reaching out to professors for research. Okay, yeah, so I reached out to 30 professors. You mentioned you got ghosted by everyone. I was ghosted by 25, so 5 out of 30 responded. The way I reached out was I sent a cold email to every professor with my resume, and I noticed the way I was able to get some more responses was by sorry, let me close the chat. Distracts me. Okay. The way I was able to get more responses was by personalizing the email to the professor. So I would actually just do a little research into what they did in their area. And then I would kind of share something that I thought was interesting in that area. And I tended to get a lot more responses that way because I personalized those emails. But generally, I think it's a matter of expanding the breadth of your email send out or email recipients. I also did research with the College of Engineering. So you can reach out to other colleges. Usually they need programmers of some sort there too. So that can be another way of getting research. It doesn't really matter which field you're doing that research in as long as it's coding related. Okay, how might we prepare for technical interviews if we have 1 month to prepare versus only 1 week to prepare? Okay, this sounds targeted because I did have only, so I had only 1 week to prepare for my Google onsite, whereas, yes, I had a month previously. So in 1 week, what I was able to do was I went through my leak code process, and that leak code process is pretty fast. So in 1 week, you can go through, again, like over half of a company list. So that's why I use that technique, because for me, it really allows me to work much faster. In 1 month, I don't see much difference besides you can obviously maybe be more comfortable with those concepts, and you can maybe not do so many problems each day, but generally the process to me was the same. What about Google job interview? Okay, how can you prepare? Well, if you get a Google job interview, they will send you a guide. I followed that guide. They send you a guide of basically this interview prep, and they give you concepts to look at, which is essentially a more general version of the concepts I shared. And some of them are like threading, operating systems, things like that. You do need to kind of study separately. But again, I just followed my leak code process, and then I read a bit on those other concepts that they mentioned in their guide. Feel free to ask questions that are also not just related to tech interviews. Basically anything is fine. Okay, what should freshmen or sophomore do to find an internship? Let me go to that slide, right? Okay, so this slide shares some of those freshman and sophomore internships. What you can do to prepare, again, I kind of did just share it, which is the, here, I will go back actually to the concept slide because I feel like that was probably the most helpful. Go, please ignore senior internships. Trust me, you know, I've been doing this throughout the week. It's very hard. So that's his full-time jobs. Okay, freshmen, sophomores, really just study these topics and you should be good to go. Do mock interviews with your friends, do lead code problems, see how long those take you. And I think referral, if you can. I know freshman, sophomore, I didn't get a referral at all. I didn't know anyone in the corporate world at that point, but that can also be helpful. But yeah, as long as you practice these concepts, the applications I know can be pretty hard. So again, in person will help you a lot for that. That's how I got my first freshman software internship interview, was again through a conference. So those are my tips. Let's see, can I go over some tips for behaviorals? Sure thing. Let's go. Okay, so yes, they're not as easy as they might seem if you've come in unprepared, which I have done in the past and it has not gone well for me. So the first thing is make sure you learn a little bit about that company and think about why you would want to work there. You can't give them a generic answer because they'll see right through it. They need to know you've done a little research. And then review your resume. Make sure you can explain everything that you've put on it in detail. So I've run into situations where I put something on my resume, forgot I put it there, and then was asked about it. And I really couldn't give any description on it because I didn't remember what it was about. So make sure to review it. Make sure you can describe your projects that you've done and any experiences that you have. And then also make a list of 3 to 5 experiences that can apply to multiple questions, like from a group project you've done where you've collaborated with others, club activities. For me, that was like HackDavis, leadership, etc. So some example questions that you might be asked are: give an example of a time you demonstrated leadership. What would you do if you were working on a group project and someone else took credit? This would be great if you had an example, as well as what would if someone wasn't doing their share of the work? I'm sure we've all faced these, but it can be very hard to come up with these examples on the spot, which is why it's good to know them ahead of time. How do you handle disagreements with teammates? Give an example, etc. So these can, for me at least, can basically be answered from 2 examples probably. And that's why 3 to 5 is probably sufficient if you have enough meat in those 3 to 5 experiences that you can build off of them for the behavioral questions. Okay, I'm a junior, actively looking for sweet internships. Okay. Companies have not been that responsive, and do you think I can still expect to hear back after several weeks? Yes, I think companies take a long time to get back. I've been in a place where I applied in like September, heard back in January, and it went straight to my spam, so I didn't even see it at first. But they get to it when they get to it. I don't think you will usually get a reply at some point. I know someone else applied to an internship in like fall and they got a response in spring, and then they eventually got the internship. So it does depend. Keep on hoping. And I would also obviously just keep applying as well. Do I have a link for internships or websites? Can you expand on that, please? What do you mean by a link? Okay, while they're expanding, I will go to the next one. When we are asked to ask questions, can we ask something about ourselves? Like, how did I perform? Don't do that. Yeah, no, don't ask them about your performance. Go in with confidence. You know, you have to act like you have confidence the whole time. I go into them so nervous, but I just pretend that I know what I'm doing. You know, so don't ask them how you perform because that ruins that whole facade you were holding of having confidence. So you want to keep up the act until the end. And they usually will want you to ask them questions about either themselves or their company. And if it will help you, I can share that slide as well, which is these are some questions that you can ask your interviewer. So again, these are very personalized, either to the company or to the person. The last one especially is my favorite. That one kind of just shows again that you're thinking in terms of a programmer, which is like, how are you thinking about scalability now? You have to actually talk about design in your job. You can't just be given the design and then code it. So how do you deal with that? And so on. So make sure you ask them more personalized questions. Okay. Do I have advice for a situation in which you get stuck trying to optimize your solution? Yes, that's happened to me. Again, the interviewer is there to help. They will not just sit still and just wait for you to eventually, give up. They will try their best to help. So once you have that brute force solution, if you can't think further, they might give you a prod, which is like, okay, how can we, maybe there's another data structure where we can get that minimum element faster. And then you're like, oh, wait, yeah, I could use a heap, something like that. So they will usually try to help you at that point. I think of interviews as a very collaborative effort more than a one person talking to another person. It's more like you're both sharing it, but you need to start it off yourself and they will help you finish it. So don't think of it in terms of like, a hardcore interview. Just think of it in terms of you're collaborating with that other person on how to solve this problem, but they know the answer, so they can help you much more. Okay, you mean websites, not link. Do I have, I'm still not sure what that means. Do you mean like, do I have like websites to refer? Do you mean like where you can find internships to apply to? It might help if you say it. Yes, no? No? Okay. Let's see. Is it possible to get an offer even if the interview did not go perfectly well, the solution wasn't achieved? Absolutely, yes. I've had at least one interview per company, basically, where, I haven't finished the solution, but I've gotten far enough in that at the end, I kind of just pseudocode the rest and they understand where I was going with it. So yes, it's perfectly fine if the solution wasn't achieved. If you weren't able to test it, it's fine. Make sure, that's why I think, that's why I try to put everything first, which is like, this is the data structure I'm using. This is the algorithm. This is the big O. These are the edge cases. So now you know where I'm heading. We'll see if I actually get there. But at least it shows that you know what you're trying to do. So yes, it is possible to get an offer, even if this interview did not go perfectly well. Okay. Any other questions? I still feel bad. I still don't know what do I have link for internships or websites to refer means. But if there are other questions, I can answer those. If not, I will just stay here. No, Angie, I'm not answering what a tree and a graph are. This is not no. Okay, how do I think it is important to spend time building projects? Okay, okay. How do you think it is important to spend time building projects using company API? So do I think it's important? Like beforehand, it can be very helpful. I've heard of people really connecting with their interviewer because they're like, oh yeah, I've used your guys' API and I've noticed there was like this issue, or I wish this functionality was better, but I have never done that and it's not necessary. But it can definitely be an added bonus when you're discussing with them at the end. And it will also set you apart as well. Something else actually that just came to my mind was something else that sets you apart in interviews is, again, treat them as people. So for instance, like in Seattle, I was doing my Microsoft on-sites, and I started all of my interviews with a very dumb question, which was like, how do you get vitamin D in Seattle? Because there's no sun most of the year. Really dumb question, but it broke the ice. And I'm pretty sure it made me more memorable because I was kind of treating it again as a collaborative discussion rather than an interview. And that can really help you. Okay. I think they mean, do you have any links to internship lists and websites where you can find internships? Unfortunately, I don't. I did, maybe they missed this. I did share some places. I don't think it's that slide. Oh, what is it this slide? Oh, yes, this slide actually, yeah. Here are some places where you can look: LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Google Search, Crunchbase, AngelList. Those are some examples of websites where you can look. How do you get vitamin D in Seattle? I don't think I got an answer. I think someone said a happy lamp. Someone said vitamins. Someone was like, what sun? So it depended. What is the most valuable project you've made? Ooh, valuable to who is the real question. Probably my most recent one at Google, which is like my Noogler project, if anyone knows what that is. It's kind of just like the very first project to get your starter project at your company. I don't think I can say much about it, but I will just say it might help prevent a outage for a specific program across all of Google, I guess. But of the ones I can say more detail, probably valuable project. A valuable for me would probably be the Facebook one I did, which was completely in Unity. It was interesting. I was in the Oculus team, and it was the first time I used Unity, and it was basically like a lot of math. So it allowed me to explore something very different from my comfort zone. And so I would say that was probably the most valuable. Where did I learn Java? In high school, I took Girls Who Code classes, and oh wait, no, that's not where I learned Java. Sorry, I self-learned Java in sophomore year of high school through YouTube videos. I watched like one a day for 100 days, so there were 100 videos. And then after that, I took AP Computer Science in high school, which made me even more comfortable with Java. And so I've stuck to Java since. But in my job now, I'm doing C++. So it did not really help me much. But yeah, that's where I learned it. How do you reach out for referrals? So I think one thing for referrals is make sure that that person can vouch for you. If they're not familiar with your work, it really doesn't help you much. One thing to mention is that when they're filling out the referral form, a lot of times it asks how familiar they are with the person, and they can say they're not. So those referrals don't really help you much. And there are others where it's like, did this person ask you to refer them? I've had that before in a referral form, and it's very hard not to answer honestly to those too. So that kind of negates the effect of that referral. So make sure you know that person personally, which makes it a lot easier to reach out for a referral. Or if you're connected to someone on LinkedIn and you see that one of their connections is working at a company you want to work at, you can then reach out to the person you know and see if they can connect you to that other person, which they usually can. And as long as they give a heads up to that other person that, oh, this person's going to reach out to your referral, if that's okay, that other person's probably open to kind of talking with you first, seeing who you are, and then giving you that referral. Okay, I will say till 5, so feel free to either keep asking or unmute and ask. Yeah. Or if there are any more of these, that interest you. Not that, oops, of these that interest you. Okay, how about the project for internship on resume? As in, where do I put that? Is that the question? Okay, I will take that as the question. As where does that project go? So usually I put internship projects under experiences. So my project is my description for that internship. I did not put that in the separate projects category. I saved the projects category for kind of, I'm trying to think. I don't know if I have a projects category anymore because I think all of my experiences are my projects. So I will put your project under the experience probably, unless you have extra details of it, in which case you can put it in both. I don't think it matters. If I have a discussion with the recruiter at a hackathon booth, is it okay if I connect with them on LinkedIn afterwards? Not sure what the etiquette is. Yes, do that. Absolutely. Make sure to add a note. You can add a note when you send a connection and just let them know where you met them. And more often than not, they will connect with you. And then you now have a new connection. So that's awesome. And that's with a recruiter. So I've done that every time. And it's perfectly fine to do that. Did you need to learn anything extracurricular? In terms of for my job, yes. I will say, I think someone mentioned this in an earlier panel. I watched a bit of it on Tech Futures as a SWE. And yes, you need to basically learn everything extracurricular. So that lead code process, right? I did not really learn greedy algorithms in school. I know we learned them, but I didn't actually learn them. So it took a lot of work actually for me to get both greedy algorithms and dynamic programming to the point where I could recognize them in a problem and recognize that that's what I needed to use and how to implement that. Okay. Does someone have a question? Voice? No? Okay. Other than that, for extracurricular, for the job itself, you will also need to learn a lot outside of your classes. For instance, like I'm in pure networking basically, and so my networking class didn't prepare me enough for that. And I've been reading textbooks now in order to prepare better for my job. So yes, extracurricular, you're always learning. And if that stops, you probably need to move to a different position or job. Okay. Sorry, 1 second. What advice can you give to a computational math major with less computer science experience interviewing for software engineering internships? Okay, yeah, I've seen some of these. If you'll notice, the process that I put is not very specific to a computer science major. That lead code process can apply to really anyone looking to interview. It might just take a bit longer for you to pick up those skills initially, but eventually you'll get to that exact same position. So review those concepts. I tend to review from scratch each year because I forget everything from the previous year. And so don't think that you have a disadvantage if you haven't had the classes that others have had, because I promise you, they probably did not learn too much in those classes anyway. That will help them with this preparation for their internships. Okay. Is it way harder to get a full-time job with only research experience or with no industry one? Okay, I haven't had experience with that. I would think not. If your research experience is extensive, I don't see why that would have any less impact than an industry experience. To me, they're pretty similar in terms of what you learn from them. And as long as you can describe the projects that you've worked on, and maybe they're long-term projects, which is even better, I don't see how it would be harder for you to get a full-time job with that. Yeah. When do you start applying for internships every year? So I applied, I used to apply like a month in, and then I learned that I should apply as early as possible, again, because there's much less competition when you apply a day after it opens, 2 days after it opens, than there is a month in. So I applied for internships mid-August, not December. Yeah, this year is a bit late. I think this year started in October. So if it was this year, I would have applied in October. Last year and the year before, I applied like mid-August, early September. So really early. And that means I was able to kind of go through the process much quicker. Don't I don't mean to stress anyone out. Oh my god, I've told people this before, like apply as early as possible, and they're like, oh my god, I haven't started. It's fine. You have time to apply. This year is very different. I know a lot of companies still have the applications open. I'm just saying it's better to apply earlier for the process to be quicker. If you don't have a job, you have to apply regardless. So as long as the application's still open, you're fine. And I know most are right now. So don't worry. Start applying now. I would not wait any longer. But yeah, it's no worries if you have not started applying yet. Okay. I've never had freshman, sophomore internships, and now I find it hard to get an internship. Any suggestions? Yeah, freshman, sophomore internships are not necessary. I just found them in a much easier, actually, way to get into companies because they do tend to be, as you saw in the concept list, they tend to be a bit simpler, but most people don't. That's why I have a topic here for freshman sophomore internships because a lot of people don't even know about them. So I don't think your problem is that freshman sophomore internship. I think maybe it's more that you might need some more projects on your resume, which is why I recommended research, something you can do during school, and probably something you can still do virtually too. I think other than that, connecting personally is a great way to get an internship. Continue to try to go to anything that's a virtual career fair, a virtual Q&A, so on. See if you can connect anyone at this hackathon, right? Who you can then connect to on LinkedIn and talk to them in more depth about kind of getting a foot into the door of that company. So I would suggest, these kind of more non-conventional methods of trying to get an internship. And also, don't underrate startups. Startups are great. They tend to also have slightly less competition. You can go back to that slide I put about where you can find like Crunchbase, AngelList. They'll have a lot of those kind of startup internships, and that's another great way to get experience. Okay, somewhat unrelated, but doesn't make sense to pursue a master's if it's taking a very long time to get a first job with a bachelor's of science. I've seen people with this predicament, right? Where they're like, okay, you know what? It's like 6 months into my internship search or into my full-time job search. Should I just get a master's? And a lot of them do. So I think like it depends mainly on you and what you want to do as your life journey. Do you think it's worth waiting another 6 months and seeing if you can get a job? Or do you think that master's will really help you? / do you even want to pursue a master's? Like if you don't, then there's no point even trying to do that. But if you want to pursue a master's regardless, it might be useful even to have that extra education before you go into your first job. Especially during these COVID times, I understand that it's very hard to get a job right now. And I have seen a lot of people going that master's route right now since they're not able to get a job at the moment. Okay. Here, I will share the link to the slides first. So let me just go to the last slide so you guys can get the link. I'll continue to answer questions until 5. So I've put my LinkedIn here as well. Just like I said about connecting with recruiters, please include a note. I tend to be fairly picky with connections just by choosing only people I know. So if you could just include a note when you connect. And then these are the slides, tech-interview-prep-slides through tinyurl. Okay. So are companies even having internship programs this year? I know Google canceled theirs for last summer when COVID broke out. They didn't cancel theirs, actually. They had internships this past summer. They were just virtual. And they have released applications for internships this summer, as far as I know. I'm not following that super closely, but I think they've released it because I've referred some people to their internship program this year. So they should be open. Okay, anything else in this 1 minute left? Okay. Once I connect with recruiters on LinkedIn, what do I ask them? So I tend to only connect to recruiters that I've talked to before in some depth, like at a career fair, or so on. So once you connect with them, at that point, you can continue that conversation, right? You can ask what jobs are currently open, so on and so forth. Recruiters you cannot really ask a recruiter for a referral, right? Because their job is to recruit you. You have to find someone who's not a recruiter, and then you talk to them, right? Maybe a software engineer. That's who I usually talk to. I talk to a software engineer rather than a recruiter. And then I connect with them on LinkedIn. And then that conversation might eventually lead to a referral, or it might just lead to them kind of giving you tips on how to best apply, on how to best interview at that company. Recruiters will probably not respond to you as often as just another employee, because recruiters are so often bombed with these types of questions that they'll probably not give you the best responses. So I would highly recommend actually just talking to someone who's not a recruiter more so than who is. Or it depends, actually. I mean, yeah, I can't say that for sure. I know sometimes recruiters can definitely get your foot in because obviously they cannot recruit you, but it depends on the depth of your conversation with them. Um, but basically, yeah, you can ask them about how you can best prepare for an interview, best ways to apply. But I'm just saying they might have a lower chance of replying to you. Okay, does anyone still need these slides? And yes, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And then if you have any other questions, I'll be more than happy to reply to them there. And I will leave this up for like 1 more minute just to make sure everyone got the link to the slides. And I hope this was helpful. Best of luck with your application and interview process. And best of luck with your project submissions as well for HackDavis. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, Angie. Still not replying to the reversing a linked list. I'm sorry. We don't know if it's singly or doubly linked. There's just a lot of clarifying questions needed there. Sure, yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. Hopefully everyone was able to get that link.